This is Lynn Fraser with the Kiloby Center for Recovery. As part of the Radical Recovery Summit series, I'm talking today with Beck Gee-Cohen, and I'm going to let him introduce himself here in a moment. We're going to get into some really interesting territory here, so I'm glad that you're with us.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. My name is Beck Gee-Cohen, and I am the Director of Business Development for La Fuente Hollywood. We're a small 10-bed treatment center in Hollywood, California, working specifically with the LGBT community. I'm also a fierce advocate for the trans community and the recovery community, and really wanting full recovery for the LGBT community. And that's really what I do. And I really believe that's what I was born to do. So I'm glad to be here to share my story.
Oh, that's excellent. So maybe we could start by talking about what does full recovery mean to you? And then we can kind of back it up and get into how you arrived at that.
For me, personally, I'm a person in long-term recovery, coming up on 13 years from substances, drugs, alcohol, and almost 5 years on nicotine, which I'm really excited about as well. I always like to put that in. I think it's really important too. And for me, real recovery, I think, is a day-to-day basis. I really believe that this idea of peeling the layers of the onion and getting into working on trauma and working on that really deeply embedded negative self-talk and understanding that and where that came from. And you'll probably hear more of my story, but even at 5 years sober, my depression and anxiety around my identity was so much so that I was ready to kill myself. So I think that, though I had stopped using, that it wasn't over. And so recovery really means having to go even deeper and look even deeper inside, and some days are better than others, I guess.
Right. Yeah. So it's a lot more than just stopping drugs.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think that was the easiest part. That's really the easiest part for me, was to stop using those but though difficult, it's no small feat. I think that the longer I stay sober, the more I need to look internally and find those avenues for which I need emotional sobriety and really happiness, really, and finding my joy. That's this year's plan, really. And it's like, what makes me joyful and what makes me happy, and what looking forward. And I have all this baggage, I have all this stuff, and all this stuff that happened to me. I have my story, but what is really ultimately like my goal of happiness today? So that's really what I try to concentrate on to the best of my ability.
Right. So what does that look like for you right now? Happiness.
All these deep questions. Of course, I brought it up, so you're going to ask me about it.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. I always go, why did I say that? I think, for me, joy. I find a lot of joy in helping others. I really do. And I find a lot of joy in helping young people find recovery or get solidified in their gender and sexual identities, and help them and see them thrive in all, in this aspect. So that really does give me joy. And I'm a helper, so that's probably, I have to balance that as well. And spending time with my friends and just being part of life has been really, really exciting. I have a lot of exciting opportunities to go and speak all over the world, and I try to just really take that in and use these opportunities as my, also my responsibility to use my platform in any way that I can. So I get really amped up when I get to share my experience with people and help treatment centers and help clinicians to be better with the community that I work in, and know that that's gonna trickle down into really helping someone else at some point in time. So I mean, that gives me so much joy all the time. Like, I just, even thinking about it, I'm just like, yes, this is what I'm supposed to do. So
I feel like that about the work that I do with people as well.
yeah.
It took me a lot longer to get here than it took you. You're a lot younger than I am. But yeah, it's wonderful when we can really be in alignment and feel
Yeah.
like this work we do is so valuable and it's really in alignment with our purpose. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't take this for granted. I think that, you know, recovery is so special, and it just it means so much to me in my life, but also like just to see people happy in their recovery, and just being like their cheerleader and going, yes, you did it, you know, like, you're doing this is amazing. And even though they sometimes are like, I didn't do anything, I'm like, yeah, but I see it. Like, and I want to share that with you, because I mean, even in my own recovery, I'm like, oh, you know, like, when you look in the mirror every day, you don't see the changes. And
That's true.
our responsibility to show other people the changes in their life they've made. So,
Mhm.
and have that reflected back to me as well from the people in my life, who see the changes in me. So it's just kind of, that's how this works, right? That's how this connection works.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the community that you serve. Scott's talked quite a bit about being really severely bullied and I think he was in grade 5. It was becoming apparent to him and then to his buddies, his pack that he went with, that he was gay. He was different. Something was different. So what age did that start to happen for you? Did you start to realize that you were questioning?
Yes. So, I mean, my story kind of takes me through a lot of coming out processes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at 16, I came out as a lesbian, and that didn't really fit, but it was the only words that I had, right? Language that I had, and community that I had even like heard of a little bit. And, but I mean, I look back all the way age of like 3 to 6 years old, when I knew that I was different, that I knew I didn't fit. I wasn't a girl, and I wasn't, but you know, 35 years ago, there was definitely no language around that. And
Yes.
I mean, you know, especially in the community that I grew up in. So it was like, oh, will be a phase, and we'll, you know, and even me, I knew, like, when I went into kindergarten, that the boys lined up on one side, the girls lined up on the other. And even though I wanted to line up on this side, that I wasn't supposed to. And so the messages received was, you do this. And depression, anxiety probably set in around that time. But then definitely increased as a young person around 12 or 13, when hormones kicked in. And then I started getting this body that was not fitting what I was feeling. And drugs and alcohol took that away, right? It didn't take it away, but it numbed it. And so I was able to kind of live my life. And I came out at 16 as gay, and I lost a lot of, I didn't actually come out to anyone probably till out of high school, but I lost a lot of friends when I came out. This was back, you know, late 90s. So it was, you know, kids today, not all kids, don't get me wrong, because not all kids have it easier at all. But I mean, we've seen some progression
We have
in the coming out process. But the statistics are still showing a lot of, you know, a lot of depression, anxiety, mental health issues, and suicidality, and all of the things, homelessness. So with LGBT youth, but I think it wasn't until I didn't come out as trans until I was 5 years sober. And so I lived my life, and I used, and that made life easier. And late at night, when everyone had gone home and I was sitting on the couch, you know, by myself with, you know, all the drugs and alcohol, it was like, this is who I am. No one's going to love me if I come out, you know. And I found recovery it was very like, in my life, I was it wasn't like I didn't go to treatment. That was not my story. I kind of went to treatment because I went to a small town in Montana to live with my best friend, and small town 12-step is very much like treatment, where, if you don't show up, they call you. If you don't show up, twice, they ring your doorbell, those kinds of things. So you're held accountable a little bit more so than these giant meetings like in big cities. But I found recovery I was just ready. I think I found that I felt better when I was actually I felt worse but then I had to find placement in my life, and for me that was the rooms of 12-step. And so but I was still hiding this secret. And at 5 years sober, I had, gone back to college, because that's what you do, right? You go back to college, you go to the dentist. And so I did those two things, and I went back to, and I went to grad school, and I had started speaking on working in the LGBT community. I was working in the community, and I was advocating for trans people as an ally. And really what I was doing is looking back on this like 7-8 years ago, I was advocating for myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this way that was a little bit separated. And yeah, I found myself on a bridge in Minnesota ready to kill myself because I wasn't out, and I was happier than I had been 5 years prior when I was using. I had gotten gifts of recovery. I had been doing this work. I started as a clinician, and I was helping others, but I wasn't helping myself. And I think that is really about, like when I talked earlier about recovery and helping, being a helper, and then also helping ourselves, I had to get honest. And so that's when I started working at doing trauma therapy. And I had a moment of, I think, a real moment of clarity when I was standing there. Whatever stopped me that day, I think I was standing above a bridge where there was cars going by, and I had a moment that I was like, I don't want to cause trauma to someone else.
Okay, right. By landing on their hood or something.
Right. Like I didn't want to and so whatever divine moment that was for me, to think about someone else. I walked off, and I said, okay, I'm going to make a commitment to myself to at least like go in and just share this and try this out. And that's kind of started this journey of transitioning. And over the last 7 years has been a progression and a learning of new self, like completely, like in so many different ways. And so I just, and now I find myself here and being able to share my experience with others, and then also help other communities, maybe not in this outwardly.
It's very common when we grow up feeling different than what we are required to be on the outside, for us to internalize that and to develop these beliefs that there's something really fundamentally wrong with us. Mm-hmm. So did that was that your experience when you were younger? Was that there was something wrong with you, or was it more that there was just you weren't allowed to be who you are because of society?
I think it was both. And I think, when I get into fear today, it's much older. It's older messages that were received, that I'm not good enough. Everyone's going to laugh at me. They're going to see who I really am. All of these things, or, and which is not a bad thing at all if they see who I really am. It's like this idea of getting vulnerable is so scary, and but yet, it's necessary for recovery. Is that we have to show people who we are. And so like when those messages kind of get into my head, usually like right before I go on, into on something like this, or you know, when I give a talk or something, I'm like, oh gosh, you know, imposter syndrome or whatever it is. That those are old messages that were received, and but I think also too, like the you know, messages received from the outside world were really something that kept me from showing my true self in for so long. Was that happen, you know, politically, what's going to happen, you know, am I safe here, am I safe, you know, what happens if I'm traveling in some small town and I get sick and I have to go to the hospital, like what, you know, what is that going to happen, you know, those things are very, very prevalent in my life. And it's not that I try not to think about them, but like but it's also something that's always on the back burner, it's always there. And so that's why I, you know, I share my experience with other clinicians so that they know that this stuff is happening with their clients that are coming in, or the people that are coming into their offices or in their families or whatever. And and I've been doing this work a long time, especially this internal work, that I can handle it a little bit better. So like if you have someone in early recovery coming in who is trans, and we, you know, there's a misgendering or anything like that, that I mean, that we're already raw nerves in early recovery anyway. So having that added to it, like however we can stop that, you know, and create a space that's so safe. It's like almost extra safe for them to be who they are and to know that they're loved and respected is important to me.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like there's like what's the general temperature reading in the community, in the recovery community and recovery centers? Do you feel like there's a lot of awareness around that it's usually fairly good, or is it a pretty bad situation?
I wouldn't say bad. I think we get into the healing. I mean, maybe I'm Pollyanna about this, but I think we get into this work because we want to help people, no matter who they are. And so, I always try to walk in to a space and say, these people have the best of intentions, right, for these individuals. And sometimes the best of intentions may keep them like in this certain space, like they may go, oh, we can help everyone, right, and we'll just keep them here, instead of like referring to appropriate professionals who really do this work, like and so that's kind of a fear of mine sometimes when I walk into a space. But for the most part, I think that there's more work to be done, depending on the geographic space, the treatment center itself, the milieu, right? Like, because you can have one really great clinician
Mm-hmm.
who does this work, but if I have to walk, you know, I only see that clinician maybe 3 hours a day at max.
Yeah.
So that's 21 more hours of the day that I'm in this other space. And so like, how do we do the least harm, right? You know, or do no harm would be ideal.
Yeah.
And so it's, you know, it's double-edged sword, I guess. You know, there's some really great people who are really invested in learning, and I think people are saying, wow, this is, I mean, I spoke about this 7-8 years ago, and you know, I would have 3 people in my talks, and now I have people coming to me and calling me and like saying, you know, this is what's happening, and wanting to learn more and do the best by their clients or their people in their lives. And so it's and I would say the last 2 years, 3 years, it's been very much more prevalent. Not that there's more trans people coming into treatment, it's just that more people are out about it. Like,
Yeah,
more,
right.
I get that too. It's like, is it trendy? Is this a trend? And it's like, no, I mean, trans people have been with us since the beginning of time. It's just how do we come out about that? And people are feeling safer and safer to share, like, oh, like that's, they're speaking my language. I see them on TV or I see them on the internet, and I go, oh, that's who I am, right? Because I mean, I would have never known or even like considered being that I am trans, or that wasn't even a possibility until I met someone who was, and I was like, oh, that's a thing. And like, that speaks to me, right? Like, it's almost like recovery. I mean,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, the coming out process, like the coming out sober, I lost a lot of friends, as we do with friends, you know, most of them, but I
Mhm.
lost a lot of people in my life because I came out sober. So it's like these coming out process, it's very parallel in a lot of ways. And the feeling of uncomfortability in our bodies and our skin without, you know, tools to manage. So what I try to do is really parallel those two identities because they're so they're so comparable.
So when I came out, as I didn't come out as a teenager, even really to myself, although looking back on it, I can see, but I had no idea that there was such a thing as a lesbian. I lived in a
Mhm.
small town in Saskatchewan, Canada, and I knew kind of that there was gay men because occasionally there would be someone around, but
Right.
I didn't even know that existed until I was in my mid-20s, and then it was like, oh, okay, this is what's going on here. But
Right. It's like, oh, there it is.
yeah, so for you to be a role model in recovery and also a healthy trans person
Mhm.
is really important for people to see, especially people just new in recovery, because if there's no role models for this, then how would we know it's possible?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there's just so many. I mean, I don't like to claim to be the beacon of mental health at all. I just want to say that. But
I wasn't putting you on.
I always like to tell people that because I'm like, oh, you know, I have my stuff, but I also like. I mean, I think that in that too is that there's an honesty of you know, like not every day is the best day, but I don't have to pick up. Want to just, you know, if they get misgendered or if something happens, um, you know, they're right back to like, well, I'm just going to go and use. And I'm like, well, like, what purpose does that serve? Right. Like that just hurts me more. And, cause we love to self-harm, you know, we like, you know, or we're not going to get through this. And so if I can share my experience with people and say, we can get through this and we can do better as non-trans people, and we also and or non-LGBT people, we can help the community. And then also as an LGBT person, like knowing also that the community has to catch up too, that like we're not going to be all, you know, perfect right off the bat. Like I try to kind of, you know, take our foot off the gas and the brakes and just kind of glide for a moment in this space that we're all learning. And we're all like, I'm learning what it's like to be sober, and I'm learning what it's like, because especially with people who are coming out or who come out in recovery, right? That happens a lot. I mean, that's my story, is that, you know, it took me to get sober to kind of go, okay, I need to do this. And it happens quite a lot. Um,
Hmm.
that you're going to be okay, and that there's people out there that can walk through this with you, that you're not alone. And that's a really important tool. That I needed that in every coming out process, that I wasn't alone, that there were. And so if I can be that voice or find other voices that way, like I'm going to do it.
Right. So in addition to safe professionals, we also
Mhm.
need community of people who get it.
Absolutely. 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 You know, I mean, I I walked in the rooms of AA when I was, you know, had two-tone hair. I had like bleach blonde hair on one side and you know, cowboys, like full on belt buckled cowboys, like right, born and bred in Montana. And um, they just loved me, and because I was going through it. Like they knew that we had this common bond of wanting to get sober or be sober or be in recovery. And I mean, I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for that. So if we can do that as a community, and maybe I don't know your story, right? Maybe I don't know, maybe it's different than what you know, than what I see on the street or in my family or but like, it, I see your pain, right? Like I see your pain, and I see you wanting to escape through drugs and alcohol and whatever else, you know, whatever else we use to escape, Netflix, or no. But I see your pain and I see you. And so I think that like treatment, recovery communities, they don't happen in a vacuum. Like, you know, we get to learn how to be with people, and then we get to spread that love like out into the world. And that's like the most important thing. And that I've learned in recovery is that we get to like if I have clients who are, I mean, I work in an LGBT specific treatment, and even then it's like, you know, the few trans clients that we have at the same time, you know, I mean, we're still only 1% of the population. They get to learn to like live together and be part of this community that maybe they haven't been part of before, right? Maybe it's just like all they've been hanging out with is gay men, and now, you know, now there's some trans men and trans women involved. And when they leave here, I can assume that, you know, if something bad were to happen, or someone were to say something bad about trans people or whatever, they can say, you know what, like, my roommate was trans and like they were super cool, and you shouldn't be doing that, right? And so we all of a sudden we get these like allies out there in the world that make us a better, you know, a better world. People in recovery, I think, make the world a better place. I mean, that's super cheesy to say, like, now that I say it out loud, but like, but we do. I think that, I mean, people that are really like, you know, invested in their recovery and whatever that is, like mental health recovery, drugs and alcohol, sex, any of that stuff.
That kind of leads us into the role of trauma in recovery. And certainly trauma has a big role in getting us into all kinds of addictions. How do you work with people who've been traumatized? There's such a disconnect when people have been traumatized. And oftentimes in their families, our families aren't accepting, they don't get us. We feel like we're a different species almost.
Yeah.
So is there kind of a broad recognition of that kind of trauma? Is there other kind of traumas that you're dealing with? Like, maybe you could tell us a bit about your treatment, the treatment center that you work in, and
Sure.
what it's like there.
Yeah, I think, so I think, and I think you had, you know, Judy Crane on at one of your, yeah, and she's a mentor of mine. And so like, you know, living with that purpose and trauma is such a buzzword, right? It's like, oh, this is, you know, I think that trauma, I mean, obviously we work with trauma in similar and different ways. So I'll talk about like the kind of the nuances of some of the traumas that we see that are coming in. You know, the trauma of like, let's say I have like an older gay man who's lived through the AIDS pandemic, right? Who has this trauma, like this almost survivor's trauma, that has struggles with intimacy because they've lost all of their friends and most of their lovers throughout this time, and now have survived and are in their 50s, 60s, dealing with, you know, ageism in the gay community, and also like not understanding why, you know, some of them don't even, because they were so resilient through those times, that they just shoved it down, right? Especially if I'm getting them, they've been using, right? But that they haven't even come to recognition of the trauma of grief and loss of their community, and their own trauma around surviving. So we work with that really well. We give it words, right? I think that with trauma, we need to give it, just like in any community, it's like we need that connection. Say, I felt that way too, right? You know, I was watching a documentary on someone who talked about during the AIDS crisis, you know, the community in and of itself we had to pick each other up, right? We had to, as gays, lesbians, trans people, we had to pick, you know, no one would touch us, right? No one would touch these men mostly. It was the lesbians, you know, they would literally not touch them. And so we had to do that on our own. But now we have this epidemic of meth and addiction, especially meth in the gay community, where we're watching our community just step over these men who are on the ground and dying because of meth and addiction, right? And saying, oh, she just couldn't handle her drugs, right? Or whatever. And this is an epidemic, like of mass proportions, that there was a New York Times article that came out recently that said the meth crisis is back. And we were like, that's never left our community, right? This has never left our community, and we see it all the time in our treatment center specifically. I think other traumas, I mean, religious trauma, something we were really significant in holding, like that piece of a lot of community members come in from, I mean, we're in a bubble in California, but I mean, in Hollywood even, but I mean, it doesn't matter where you're coming from, like, you know, families and, or family, you know, acceptance. We know that, like, I think it's, you know, the 41% of trans people attempt suicide, and it significantly like lowers, like teenagers, like I think it's like 50% attempt suicide before the age of 20 years old or that are trans. And if we have family acceptance, that rate goes to 4%, which is the average of teenagers who attempt suicide. What an easy thing, right? I mean, it's like the yeah, duh study, right? When I accept someone for who they are, like they have less depression, anxiety, and, you know, are more loving of themselves. So
That's a
talk a lot
huge
about that.
number, though. 50% to 4%.
Yeah.
Yeah, the power of connection.
The power, absolutely. The power of connection and acceptance and just loving people because they are, right? I think that there's, I talk a lot about when I do conferences and things, I talk about the trauma of invisibility. I think that is a significant trauma in the LGBT community. Like, you're not seen, or the only way that you're seen is as, you know, the stereotypes, right? Or that happens a lot in treatment centers too. It's like, oh, sure, we accept LGBT people. And it's like, you can just be here, right? Like, we'll accept you, but you can just be here, but we're not really like seeing you or hearing you. LGBT people are less likely to speak out in group settings when they don't feel connected or seen. So it takes a really good clinician to bring that all in. So yeah, so dealing with that, I mean, and then there's the basic, the community trauma, the secondary trauma that the community feels. You know, I did my undergrad thesis on recovery in the LGBT rural communities, and really talked about the Matthew Shepard effect. Now, this was back, you know, and it still has an effect for people in rural communities. I was talking with many gay men who, you know, didn't come out because they were afraid they're going to get, you know, beat up. And, you know, the fact that, like, I and my wife, we both still, when we go on traveling, even though we get actually seen more of as a heterosexual couple, like upon like visually, but like I do have to look at, like, where am I going to be safe if something happens? Lesbian, gay couples have to think about, if I go on vacation, can I hold my partner's hand? Like, we're still there. It's not, it doesn't just go away. Again, we've seen progression, but we've also seen an increase in violence. The more trans people that are coming out, we're seeing an increase in violence. And we have to look at intersectionalities of race, class, and all of that, because, you know, trans women of color are being murdered at significantly high rates. And so if I have that person come into my treatment center or into my office, they hold that with them. They're coming with that. They're coming with that trauma, that, like, knowing that, you know, at any moment, you know, I can be beat up because of who I am, like, because of who I am at my core. And so and what I'm also seeing, what we're seeing too, is now with baby boomers, now going into, maybe being out and then going into maybe, assisted living establishments, things like that, and finding that a lot of them are going back into the closet because maybe their partner passed away and they, you know, like, they don't feel connected. And so we're seeing, you know, and these are things that there's a lot to it, but there's also, like, again, like, there's a lot of that trauma and there's a lot of that heavy stuff that we work with, but there's also that, like, immense amount of resiliency as a community that we have. And so, like, I really try to, like, when I'm working with clients, is really trying to, like, foster that, empowerment and that resiliency, because they brought them here, right? Like that resiliency, like got you here, you know, you survived, and
That's
like
really
let's
important to acknowledge.
foster that.
Yeah, and along with trauma comes the strength and the resiliency and the knowing who we are and being okay with who we are,
Yeah.
finding our communities. I lived about 10 years ago. I moved to a small rural community in Alberta, which is kind of north of Montana, right?
Yeah.
And I was in a lesbian couple, and we were both older, and so it was kind of like, it was a kind of cool act.
Yeah.
And, but the gay men, very much not allowed. You know, there was a couple visible, but, and then, you know, once we kind of knew a few people, that it's like, oh, this person, you know. And so there was this whole underbelly of people who were known to each other, but not out in the community at all.
Yeah.
And, you know, Brokeback Mountain was filmed pretty close to there.
Right there. Yeah, I lived in Montana, actually, so this is prior to me coming out as trans. We would first of all, we were like, there's no like lesbians here, like there's no like, there's no gay community, which is actually like where it is. It's actually there's quite a community, you just have to find it. But we would go to these barbecues that were like invite only, and we would go, and they would kind of look at us like, who are you? Like, who are you coming in here? And, you know, don't tell anyone, because, you know, I mean, the fact that like LGBT people can get married across the country, right? It's like great. But if I celebrate, let's say if I'm a gay male and I want to get married to my partner, it's recognized all on a federal level. But if I'm in Tennessee and I start celebrating that and I tell people at work and they find out I'm gay, I can be fired. Like with no ifs, ands, or buts, right? So like we're still on this like teeter-tottering, you know. I worked for a place in Florida, even, you know, and I mean, I had a moment where I was like, if they wanted to fire me for being trans, they totally could. I mean, they didn't at all. Like they were so supportive and accepting, but like if they wanted to, they totally could. And those kinds of things are really scary. I think there's maybe a couple of states that are really protected. There's 32 states that you can be fired from if you're trans. So why do people go in the closet or go stealth and not tell people that they're trans? Or I've had plenty of clients who come in who live their life as one gender out there in the world. And then they come into treatment and they would change clothes and they would go by a different name, and they would live their life and just be their authentic selves. And I was always like, oh, come on, you just need to come out. But it was like, I have this career. And if I come out in my career, like that's why you see a lot of individuals who come out as trans, especially white trans women who come out later in life because they've ended their career and they've, you know, now they're retired and they can be their authentic selves. So there's a lot to it. There's still this hiding, and we can't deny it. You know, we can't deny it.
And there's children are a factor too sometimes. You know,
yeah,
to have custody taken away because you're on that spectrum somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So like, you know, these traumas come out, you know, and we hide and we use drugs and alcohol, and we just, you know, the things just start piling on. I'm a big believer that the foundation of a person is their gender and sexuality. So if I'm building a house, right, and the foundation, there's a crack in it, right, and I just hide it, right, I put a rug on it and I go, oh yeah, like everything's great, right, and I make this house, and then, you know, all of a sudden things get off balance, and you know, it keeps crumbling and things keep happening, and you know, the cracks get bigger over the years. Like the more you hide, right, the more you try to like push it down, the cracks get more and more. And so you know, people will come in and they'll say, you know, my relationships are crumbling around me, you know, and also like it was so easy for me to hide my addiction because I hid the like core of my being. So it was like that was just second nature.
Yeah.
putting that mask on to hide, and to be dishonest, and by omission or not, or just being totally dishonest, because I just had learned how to be someone that I wasn't, that society wanted me to be. And then those masks only work for so long.
Mm-hmm. Takes a lot of energy to repress who we really are.
Absolutely. And we don't even know, sometimes we don't even know it. All of a sudden it's like, and that's why people come out when they get in recovery. They're like, oh my gosh,
Mm-hmm.
this is it, And I had that moment too, where I was like, oh, okay, well, this is it. Maybe I can use again. Not a good thing to do, because and then it was like, I had to weigh that,
Yeah.
I'd rather just live a life sober and in recovery than to test that.
Yeah.
To test that water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's your perception of young people, and not so much is it hard to come out, because I know a lot of people still have that experience, but amongst young people, like say 30 and under, do you think there's more acceptance now of just this variety of sexual expression and gender identity? Is this something that the curve of people that are really homophobic are starting to die off? Is there an age thing here?
It can only help. No, I think, I think a lot of young people, because they're growing up with it, as there is like this like normalizing, and again, it depends on where you are in the world, geographically, religiously, racially, all these things. Like, but I with young people, adolescents, and they teach me all the time. Up and come. They usually go, "Oh, Beck, that was like 6 months ago." So I know, and they, they, a lot of them are just like, yeah, whatever. So what? When I work with young people in treatment, a lot of them, they can care less if you have a trans person in treatment or a non-binary person in treatment. It's their parents that have the issue, right? It's the parents that are struggling. And so like as institutions, adolescent institutions, the institution has to make the policy, right, to say, this is who we have here. But the young people are like, yeah, whatever. I have a friend who's gay. I have a friend, friend who has 2 moms. I have a, trans uncle, all these things. It's just, I think it's becoming more and more, it's interesting because, there's more acceptance, like, even in research, it's like they say that there's more acceptance with young people, but yet the bullying is still there, right? The bullying is still happening, and there's still the message, we still get messages. And I think that actually even causes even more, it can cause more trauma, right? And more shame, because, I have a community that's like, yeah, go, gay rights, here it's all good. And then I'm having like something over here that says, don't do that, right? Like a religious institution that's saying don't do that, or, a politician that says this is bad, or I love all LGBT people, but here are here are the policies that I'm going to take away, and so like in that fight, in that battle, like on the in-between, I would say that's the shame that it causes, because it's like I'm being told this from one person, and then it's like, being stretched out, and like kind of battling between the two and trying to find my place in that. If I'm a gay person, right? So I have, straight people over here who are fighting for my rights, and then straight people over here who are saying no. And I'm like, well, where am I in this, really? Like, who am I in this? And so that's why it takes, I think I'm a big advocate on like having allies that are not transgender and not gay, who need to speak out, but also following lead in allowing trans people and gay people the voices that they need to be able to share those things, and they need to be able to be part of the conversation and have a seat at the table, just like women do, just like people of color do. Like there needs to be a more diverse table being set.
Right. Well, and it also speaks to the importance and not to put any pressure on anybody. It happens with safety and with courage to be who we really are.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, as an older lesbian, I'm not partnered anymore. So I pass relatively easily, and people don't assume, they just kind of, oh, that's an old lady, you know, whatever. So people wouldn't necessarily know I'm lesbian unless I speak up.
Right.
And it's important to have that visibility, in part because people, you know, when I was younger and I was really activist in that lesbian movement, and really wanting to be heard and to heal that shame, it was very important to me that I had other people around me that were part of that community and that spoke up. And that wasn't the norm back then either. Most
Mm-hmm.
people were very much closeted for the same reasons they are today.
Yeah.
And so I think everybody who can take that risk and be open is very helpful for the whole.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I said, you know, earlier I was talking about, like, I get this opportunity in this space of, like, the addiction world, right? Like, this is my space. I mean, I have friends who are in the mental health specific world, or in, like, the advocacy and policy world, you know, and so, like, I've just kind of taken this space, and I'm like, I have this opportunity, and now I'm going to make it, like, my responsibility. I'm just going to go for it. And, you know, it's, I feel blessed, you know, I mean, some days are harder than others. Some days, you know, I'm like, why did I do this? Maybe I should just be a barista again, you know, but other days, you know, I have these conversations with people, and, or I'll get a phone call from or like a Facebook message from an old client that, you know, has years sober and is coming out, and, or has come out, and I get to be a part of that. Just in that I feel so grateful, like that. That's, like, really that immense gratitude that I have for doing this work. Because sometimes it seems endless, as you know, or, you know, as you know. Yeah.
And yet what I find is that as people find a way to be authentic and to be really seen and accepted for that, that's the shift that changes everything.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when I'm seen, like, it just feels better.
Yeah.
You know? It just feels better.
So before we close, we're almost at our hour.
Wow, that was quick.
I know that was, wasn't it? Yeah. So what would you say to somebody who's just coming into recovery? What are the most important elements that you think it would be helpful for people to really work with or know about?
I think finding people who have longer term recovery than you. In my experience, I had a couple friends who, like, I got sober with a couple months apart, but it was really those people who had more time that could really tell me, like, oh, I've been there. I've been through that. And I say the same thing about LGBT youth too, right? Like, finding mentors who've been there, who've done that, and who've gotten through it and walked through sober. A couple of my friends had 10, 12 years sober when I was just getting sober, and it was like ridiculous value. There's so much value in that. So, and I would also say, like, you know, find that community, whoever that is, like, and you will find it. But that community for me has been the most significant. And I also always talk to someone in recovery at least once a day. And if I'm not feeling good, I get honest and I say, I'm not feeling good. I'm not having a good day, which is really hard to do. It's really easy to say, I'm good. Everything's good. I'm fine.
Yeah.
But getting honest with just one person, you know, whoever that is, you know, I have a small group of, like, 5 people that any one of them I can call and say, I'm having a really bad day. And just get it out before it gets too big.
Yeah, it's we've been talking about connection kind of all the way through, and alienation, and not feeling like we're part of the norm, or, well, that's not maybe the right word, but when we feel like we're excluded, one of the things that I really noticed was in my own community, I felt like I was an integral part of that. But then when I get out into the work world, or into the, you know, just kind of the general public, you're always on guard. You're always being careful. And either that, or I was really into defiance for a long time too. So, okay, this is who I am. I don't care if you like it or not.
Right.
But there's a comfortability of just really being who we are and expressing that really helps with recovery for sure. But
Yeah.
also just with that joy and happiness that you were talking about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I find, and those are the people who challenge you too, right? Those people are the ones who will, who will call when you are not calling, or hear something in your voice and be like, doesn't seem right. There's something not right about you. So if you get to know a couple of people, you don't have to know everyone. I think we sometimes in recovery, we go, oh, I have to like do mindfulness meditation for 3 hours a day, or it's not going to work, or, like, it's like we have to do this like 180 shift. And it's like, really, I have to do like this like 2% shift, and it can like totally change my day. Like it can totally like, I can just say, not doing too good today. I just get it out and I go, oh, I'm better now. It's just weird how things change. But I mean, black or white thinking, I need all changed. I need everything to be different tomorrow, and really realizing that those small shifts are so important and so valuable.
Right. And those are doable.
Absolutely. Well, yeah. And there's that. Because a 3 hour a day meditation lasted maybe not even 3 hours. Right.
Yeah. So how can people get a hold of you and learn more about you?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways. You can go on to La Fuente's website. It's LAFUENTE Hollywood.com, LaFuenteHollywood.com. You can check out our website there. You can also find me on my consulting site, which is bgcbridge.com. And if you needed any training or had any questions, I totally can answer and help answer, or find resources for individuals that are part of the LGBT community. So,
and so you go out and do public talks.
I do.
Right. So a recovery center or anyone interested.
Yeah. The next one is I'm doing out your way, actually, is West Coast Symposium down in Palm Springs. June. Yeah.
Okay.
So unless you want to come to London in 2 weeks, you can do that too. But
that's awesome. Yeah. Oh, very cool. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Go to kilobicenter.com, Radical Recovery Summit. For access to the interviews, you can watch them free online for 48 hours after they air, or you could purchase an all-access pass. kilobicenter.com.